we meet our friends. But will we really beat COVID? Will we beat other main threats which are much bigger? Post-COVID equals pre-disaster is the title of our meeting, our brainstorming. We are not yet post-COVID, but we are for sure pre-disaster. Much worse is coming. Climate change, technological disruptions, severe pandemics, maybe even major war. You know, of course, COVID is a deadly tragedy, but compared with what's ahead, then it looks like a training camp, like test run. The main threats are global. We can address them only if humanity cooperates. Can we do it? For me, this is the main question for our meeting. This is also the main question for humanity, because it's not at all sure that humanity will learn lessons from COVID, work together, and survive. And yes, I'm talking about survival because I am sure the existence of Homo sapiens is on stake. And look on this guy. By the way, this is very important masterpiece of famous British artist, Mark Quinn, and looks like he agrees with me that he is also worried about extinction. Now, you can ask me very reasonable, logical question. Why we are talking here in Kyiv about global threats? From my point of view, there are three important reasons for that. First, Ukraine and Kyiv is a regional intellectual hub. I will explain what I mean. The pandemic showed there is much talk about global cooperation, but frankly speaking, we don't have real, strong, deep global cooperation. And if we want to have at least chance for this global cooperation, we have to start serious global conversation. Because mainly politicians are busy with the crisis of today. But we have to talk today about global threats of tomorrow, until not too late. And for this global conversation, we need intellectual hubs all around the world. And this conversation, this global conversation, is just beginning. We, with you, who got together to think, debate, brainstorm with some greatest minds in the world and brilliant young Ukrainians, were among pioneers of this conversation to prevent global disasters. Ukraine, as intellectual regional hub, has great chance to contribute substantially to this global conversation to prevent global disasters. Second, Ukraine has the moral right to be a motor, a key participant of this global conversation to prevent global disasters, because we have something to say. Ukraine suffered more main disaster during past 100 or so years than any other country in the world. 2 world wars, Hitler and Stalin, Holocaust and Holodomor, nuclear disaster, and finally, war in the center of Europe since 2014. We know disaster personally as a few on the planet. Ukraine must participate and deserves to be listened to in this global conversation to prevent global disaster. And finally, third reason. For me, all reforms in Ukraine, all reforms in Ukraine, additionally to making humanity, to making Ukrainians happy and give them good life, have to have in the end one goal: to make Ukraine able to contribute to addressing global threats, period. From the creation of YES in 2004, we said and showed Ukraine is not only integral part of Europe's history, but also as an important part of Europe's future. In this post-COVID and pre-disaster world, it's clearer than ever what must be Ukrainian path. Reform yourself and be able to contribute to this global anti-disaster efforts. Then you are part of the future. Then Europe and the world will need you. We will be not the ones who ask, but the ones who are being asked. Mr. President, for us it's real honor and pleasure that you're now, today, with us, and you will present your vision about global threats and Ukraine's role. We all know how busy you were especially during the last few weeks with, I think, fantastic, very emotional, very powerful celebration of 30th anniversary of Ukrainian independence, and also with your official and, I think, very successful visit to the United States of America. But I have to say one thing. Mr. President, thank you very much that you created and successfully inaugurated Crimean platform. From my point of view, this is very, very important initiative. Mr. President, I cannot say that I support all of your initiatives, but this initiative fundamentally, vitally important for Ukraine, for Europe, and for the world, and it has great potential. Yalta European Strategy is initiative of private sector and civil society, and we will be happy to support Crimean platform in any way. With this understanding, please allow me to make a small suggestion. We all know that this week all Jews celebrated New Year, Rosh Hashanah, and next week all Jews in the world will celebrate main Jewish holiday Yom Kippur, and already traditionally, as already thousands of years, in the end of Yom Kippur they will say, next year in Yerushalayim. And I suggest to make as official slogan of Crimean platform, next year in Crimea. And maybe even you will put this slogan on the official letterhead. And I will be curious to see how dozens of heads of state and government will put their signatures under this slogan. Also, knowing a little bit about your character, I wonder now if in the end, next week, in the end of Yom Kippur, maybe you will say, next year in NATO, next year in European Union, and we know for 100% one day it will happen. But we are here as Yalta European Strategy, already traditionally will say next year in Yalta. Dear friends, I wish you all very inspirational, very productive brainstorming. Stephen, you have great honor to moderate, finally, physically, personally, to moderate our main panel with the President of Ukraine. Mr. President, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the invitation. I welcome the participants and every guest of YES conference. I welcome our distinguished international guests. We are happy to see you all in Ukraine. I'm happy to
радий чути, що ви саме це відчуваєте,
hear you.
що ви сумували
I
за
am
Україною.
happy to hear that you missed Ukraine, and I would like to say welcome to Ukraine.
А з моменту нашої останньої
Since
зустрічі
our
минуло
last
2 роки,
meeting, it
погодьтесь,
has been already
дійсно
2
глобальних
years,
подій, глобальних
and
потрясінь, які сталися
certainly
протягом них,
global events that happened during those 2 years, there would be enough of them to live during 200 years, but this is the reality. I hope that the whole world will understand what's going on, or it's going to be hard to survive. What makes the new reality difficult? Because it is always going to be new for us. We fail to catch up. It's hard to describe that in manuals on history because the new history is not about periods that happen every 30 years or 50 years. The new reality is a month, a week, or even a day. What yesterday was impossible, today is possible. What today is possible, tomorrow is old. And this conference proves that. Look at the context, look at the contrast of the topics of the forum this year compared to the last year. 2 years we talked about happiness. Today we are talking about survival. It took only 2 years to change the fundamental basic concept of happiness. And happiness of 2021 and happiness of 2019, they are different types of happiness, just like bicycle and Tesla. In September 2019, we managed to get Ukrainian sailors back to Ukraine from the arrest. There was Mr. Sentsov with us, Mr. Mikirov, and many other political prisoners. When our sailors landed in Ukraine, hundreds of people, family members, their friends, journalists, welcomed them in the airport. And everyone cried, and everyone kissed each other, and no one kept the distance, no one wore any face mask. No one took the PCR test on arrival. No one knew the lockdown word. And that was the happiness at that moment, because we didn't know how that was going to happen, to change over a year. Happiness is when you don't know, check the temperature all the time. Happiness is when your grandma doesn't need a ventilator. Happiness is when you can go to a hairdresser without any problem. And happiness is 0 deaths per day when you look at statistics in Donbass or because of COVID-19, the word that we didn't know in 2019. So the major topic, the major point that we hear here, that catastrophe is not when COVID is over, catastrophe or disaster is when the COVID starts. I think this is a controversial topic. But when the epidemic starts, that we were not aware of, that we're not prepared for, that is the topic. Someone lost smell, a feeling of smell. Someone lost the sense of humanity when people were throwing stones in the windows of buses that were carrying our fellow countrymen. But some people took flowers, took candy, took toys, and went to these people to the hospital, and the consciousness prevailed. We kissed and embraced each other, and we understood that we can overcome everything. We had no face masks on our shelves, but very soon there were no free shells for the face masks. We didn't have the tests, but we took the test very quickly. We learned how to make those tests, how to treat them, and we taught our medical workers how to do that. We raised the salaries to our medical workers, that's important, but we improved their self-esteem, their feeling of security, their profile of this job. Today we have a big percentage of beds in hospitals with oxygen devices. We have quite a low percentage of death rates. I don't know whether it makes sense to talk about small percentages of those rates, because we're still talking about death. We created new jobs, we started building roads, both like the US did in 1930s. We started new construction of roads to make jobs. Our economy got big support thanks to the help of big financial institutions and international partners. At least at the moment, we didn't get the financial support, but we tried to help our citizens as much as possible through DIA in particular application. We found new resources, we started to think differently, and we didn't switch on the money maker. We, compared to other countries who have better economies and who have no war in Donbass and have no occupied territories, we performed quite well. We introduced adaptive lockdown, quarantine. I would say this is an adequate quarantine. We introduced lockdown at the best time. It wasn't long, it wasn't painful, it was that painful compared to other nations. We never waited for the support from others, and I think this is a big victory for our country. We were independent and we helped others without waiting to hear the thank you word. We helped our medical workers, and we are prepared to help anyone without any exception. But for many days we didn't have enough vaccines for everyone who wanted to get them. Then we received millions of vaccines, but those millions of the people who wanted to get them disappeared because many people spent money on propaganda and anti-vaccination. But still we provided a lot of certificates in vaccination. We survived, we didn't sink, we didn't go down, and I think that no wave is dangerous for us anymore. We know how to overcome them, and we know with whom we can overcome them. Whether we have addressed the issue, ideally no, but I assure you that there is no country that managed to cope with the issue ideally. You would say that no, there is, and maybe there would be true, maybe not. There is no country developed, wealthy, whatever developed and wealthy it is, it never passed the COVID-19 test. But failing
Did we learn our lessons? Yes, we did. Whether we learned them well enough, I'm not sure. We are talking about survival post-COVID. However, this discussion will focus on new challenges, whilst we can say that the old ones have been resolved. This is an illusion. I think that the main message of COVID-19 is not about increasing biosafety, development of medicine, or growing resilience in business. You know, every doctor will tell you that you have to go to the root causes, not to the symptoms, and this is, to me, the main cause for COVID. We'll always be facing new threats, new infections, new bombs, because the world is still competing for influence, for new markets, for being able to influence the policies of other states. Nuclear, information, biological weapons is what the world is striving for because it means power. But in this case, new viruses will crop up every year, like new iPhones, COVID 21, 22, 23, then we'll have new brands, new vaccines available through, chargers that come with every iPhone, not compatible with other makes. I'm not a doctor, I won't be able to diagnose the situation, but I fear that the world will not develop this herd immunity because everyone is for himself. We are talking coherence and unity to resolve the challenges of climate, war, poverty, but they seem to be all just declarations because you can see the world united in Facebook, where everyone supports Australia during fires or the United States during floods, when everyone expresses sympathies for Afghanistan or Ukraine against whom Russia is waging its war, but it's not real reality, it's virtual reality. And real reality, yes, the Yalta European strategy has been convened in Kiev because Yalta is still occupied, and we do not know whether there is will around the world to restore the status quo. The main lesson of COVID-19 to me is that unfortunately everyone is for himself. Well, the world wants to act together to resolve the challenges of climate change or nuclear weapons, but we all see that equality is one thing and distribution of vaccines takes another path. Most people in the world have passports and citizenship, but it seems that there are lives who are more important than other lives. And that's the value or price of smaller nations that are not members of G7 or G20 clubs. And COVID finally stated what top-notch politicians say. This is your place, and smaller nations have fewer chances of survival if the world is hit by other bigger problems, and it's not a fact at all that someone will come to their rescue. Nations aren't equal, and COVID has shown that in a very striking manner. And at the same time, it has also demonstrated that it can make everyone's equal, whether you possess nuclear weapons, what your GDP is, and told the world, you are all the same, so please unite, because new lessons gonna be even more tragic. Is it a catastrophe? Not yet, but unless the world understands that we will see the war of everyone against everyone else. Do we need that? No, the world does not need new viruses, new lockdowns, or new vaccines. The world needs leaders who base their actions not upon the force of weapons they possess, but the force of their words, understanding, and will. The will to change the world, to create new reality and do away with the worlds in this day and age before the war puts this world to an end, to its end. Thank you, citizens of a big and independent nations.
Mr. President, thank you very, very much indeed. It is great to see you here. It's wonderful for me to be joining you all at the Yalta European Strategy this year. It's a great pleasure to have you with us, Mr. President. Last time we met was in London, and I said to you, welcome to Hard Talk. Today I'm saying, welcome to a brainstorm, and I hope that you feel able to be as free and frank with us as you possibly can be, because we want to generate a free-flowing conversation over the next half an hour or so. I was very struck by your words, the seriousness. It might be hard talk, yeah? It might be hard talk. I was very struck.
It's great to wake up with your end.
Well, let's keep...
I have to speak to microphone.
You need the mic. Let's just get to grips with what you said, because your speech was fascinating, and it strikes me that over the past 2 years and more, you've been on quite a journey yourself. You came to power full of optimism. And right now, I'm getting the message that some of that optimism may have disappeared from you. You talk about survival. You talk about the lesson of COVID being that in some ways, the world has shown that everyone is for himself, which is a depressing thought. And I just want to put to you that right now, Ukraine is in a very vulnerable position, not just because of the impact of COVID, but also because of the impact it's had on thinking in the United States, in Europe, where we see both of your key partners inward-looking, somewhat defensive, and that clearly has an impact on Ukraine. Do you feel that this is a moment of great vulnerability for your country?
Thank you very much for your question. I didn't understand. You asked me many different things. What do you want? Really? I mean that
what I want is...
If we speak about COVID, look to people, all of them, they're afraid of COVID, but they are all of them without masks, you see? That is real thing, that is real life, what I see. If we, or you want to ask?
No, I want to listen. Keep going.
No, what do you listen about?
The point I was trying to make was that right now, Ukraine is in a very difficult position.
Yes.
You're dealing with COVID, but you're also, and we know this from your visit to Washington, you're dealing with friends and partners who are taking decisions which raise questions about whether you can rely upon them.
Да. Дякую за запитання. Я почав з того, як тільки я сказав про маски.
As soon as I mentioned the masks, I could see some members of the audience put them back on. No, we are changing, we are listening. When I say that we are in a difficult situation, let me say that, let me reiterate what I wanted to say. We've learned some lessons, we learned to live in this situation, and Mr. Pinchuk welcomed me, but there were other presidents present, and I know that they can recall the times when Ukraine was in a difficult situation as well. We've learned to live in difficult situations, and we sometimes keep asking us why we are not members of the European, where lives seem better in Switzerland, they have better health care. Will we be trying to treat oncologists in Kiev? No, better in Austria, because healthcare there is
COVID
better.
дав
We keep
саме
talking about that, and
на ці
COVID
важливі
provided
питання.
some answers to some of those
Достатньо
questions.
професійна,
We
нормальна
have,
держава.
we are
Дуже
a
непоганою
professionally
медициною, з
managed
дуже
state
прекрасними
with a
лікарями,
good healthcare and
які,
excellent doctors
може, не такі амбітні через ті складнощі, в яких вони
aren't
жили,
as
зростали,
ambitious
навчались,
as
так і
elsewhere
є.
because
Був
of the
непростий
difficult
період
times
трансформації
they
після Радянського
grew
Союзу, інші
and there
держави,
was
як
a
жити,
difficult time of
де
post-Soviet
шукати підтримку. І саме
transformation.
через те, що ми постійно шукали
And it
підтримку,
is
чи це Росія, тому що
exactly
вона
because
сусід, це
we
було на початку
wanted to
після
find
розвалу
support either
Радянського
in
Союзу,
Russia,
а після
in
ми
a
побачили свою
neighborly
самостійність,
state, and
давайте шукати в
then
Європейському
we
Союзу, а
started
після Європейського
seeking other
Союзу,
alliances
дивіться,
in
що
the
відбувається,
European
нам потрібна
Union.
новітня армія,
Now
давайте
we
чекати
see
допомогу
that
від Сполучених Штатів Америки.
we
Це все
probably
прекрасно.
would seek
Але
US
ще раз
help to
повертаюся
help
до
us
теми
develop
COVID.
a
COVID
better
показав, з
defense
ким ми, хто нам допомагає
capabilities,
і на
but
кого ми
COVID, like I
розраховуємо.
say, has
І тому я
shown
саме
us
про це
clearly
говорю,
who
що
is
я не
our
вважаю, що ми у
friend and
складному
who
становищі.
is our supporter. I'm
Ми
not
знаходимося саме
I
у
don't
тому
say that
становищі,
we are in
в
a
якому
difficult
повинна була
situation. No, we are in a
знаходитись Україна
situation
з
that
самого початку,
Ukraine
коли вона була
should have
готова
probably found
усвідомлювати,
itself
що вона
from day
самостійна
one of its
держава.
independence
І
when
коли
it
ти
became
молода,
aware of
самостійна
its
держава,
independence,
і
a
за
young
30 років
independent
відновлення твоєї
state
самостійності неможливо побудувати ринкову
fighting for
економіку, неможливо
independence
не від кого не
without
залежати, а залежати тільки від свого бізнесу,
being able
ринку,
to build
потужного
a
приватного
strong
сектору.
market
Ми
economy.
упродовж ковіду
We,
отримали відповідь,
during
а упродовж війни, починаючи з 14-го, ми
have
отримали
heard the
відповідь, яка
answer,
у нас
and
армія,
we
тому що ми
also
не з ким
could
не
hear the
воювали.
answer about
І
our
вона
defense
отримала
capabilities
знак
after
бути
2014.
Тому ми в становищі
So
сьогодні
we,
достатньо міцною, поважаємо
like I
кожного
say,
українця армію.
we do
Достатньо
have an
непоганої,
army that every
непоганої
Ukrainian
економічної
respects with
ситуації, економічне становище,
well,
які викликані для нас навіть не тільки
stable
зараз
economic
ковідом, тому
situation
що
that
і впала
has
наша економіка не так сильно, як у деяких
deteriorated
країн Європи. Тому
because
що
of COVID, but not
Тому
as
що
much as it did, say, in
розраховували на
other
себе, і тому що
European
вони дуже сильно
nations.
від когось
Exactly,
залежать.
because we
І,
relied on
і що стосується
ourselves.
Сполучених Штатів.
And now, to the United
Let's
States.
talk about your
USA.
friends, and in particular the United States.
Our friends in USA,
Yeah, you don't need that because you understand me perfectly.
sometimes
well.
I need.
Well, let's talk about your biggest friend, perhaps your most important friend, the United States. Ukraine has to be aware of what's happening in other parts of the world. You must have watched very carefully what Joe Biden did in Afghanistan. He walked away from a strategic commitment to Afghanistan, and we see the result. The Taliban are in power. That clearly is something you in Ukraine have to think very carefully about. The United States' willingness to walk away, Joe Biden's determination to focus on his efforts and political resources at home. Do you worry that what the US is now doing has implications for Ukraine?
Дякую. По-перше, мені здається,
Thank you. First off, it seems to me there are many smart people around. Taliban, you said, came to power after Biden has withdrawn from Afghanistan, but I'd say that Taliban came to power much earlier than that. You can't lose all your territory, so to speak, in 4 days. I think that Taliban was there in government long before John Biden decided to withdraw. I am not here to judge the U.S. The U.S. asked us for assistance. Our intelligence stepped in. We managed to evacuate many Ukrainians and foreigners from Afghanistan. And once again, campaign, it showed that there are professionals around, and you can't expect me to disclose all the information about the capabilities of our intelligence, of our... We haven't lost a single life out of 700. Our guys helped evacuate from Afghanistan, and in this situation we helped both U.S. and our European colleagues. Now, our strategic partner, the United States.
Can you now rely on the United States?
I think yes. Мені здається,
Well, I think yes, we can, because, well, again, our relations are on a different level. Frankly speaking, we didn't hear a clear response with regard to our desire to become a NATO member or something that what Mr. Pinchuk warned me against, saying next year in NATO. No, I'm quite aware of the situation. I am not one of those Ukrainian presidents who would suggest Ukraine join an organization every year, knowing full well that it's not fit for that step. And I think that we are ready. It's someone else who isn't ready to welcome us. I saw U.S. National Guard. I saw representatives of many European defense forces during these 2 years of my tenure. Our army, let me suggest, is one of the most powerful armies world over. So when we hear about reforms in the defense sector, in the army, that prevent Ukraine's joining the NATO, I think that this is not a very sincere statement. In the States, in the United States, we did have a very good talk. I'm not gonna put billboards around the country promoting our strategic partnership with the United States. We have long been good partners of the United States, and now these relations are even better, and not because of my, so to speak, contribution. We have support in the United States, bicameral, so to speak, support, because Americans would like to support Ukrainians. That's what I
You do not
see.
have a clear pathway to NATO membership. You certainly don't have a clear pathway to EU membership. The United States has, it seems, basically given up on its efforts to stop the Nord Stream 2 project. On a whole raft of issues, you could say that Ukraine is not getting the support of the United States and Europe that you hoped to achieve over the past 2 years. At what point are you going to say, this isn't working for us? You know, we are not getting from our partners what we need. You need to be clear about it, don't you?
We actually appreciate this very keenly. I'm a very adequate person, and I very keenly appreciate and I understand what it is we need and what we can be given and what will not be given to us. And we shouldn't go back to asking when you are told that in very plain language, the message that Ukraine is getting. My position is very simple. We are ready to seek NATO membership based on the current quality of our army and our professionals and the reforms that we are pursuing. This is what we need. It's not the European Union or NATO. These reforms are needed for our people in order to make people's life better and easier and expand our economic opportunities. So it's not a question of, yes, we may not be getting what we think we deserve to obtain, but we are not asking. We simply state that we think, we guess that NATO needs us. And we believe that a strong European Union is impossible without Ukraine. And this is a message that I've clearly stated to the US President, that NATO is going to lose without Ukraine being part of it. The European Union is going to become slowly but steadily getting weaker and weaker without Ukraine on board. I'm not prognosticating or anything. It's the historians out there and politicians and with a lot of expertise in these matters. But from what I've seen, that the attitude towards the European Union, to European politicians on the part of the leadership of the European Union, leaders of modern Europe, they are not all united in their wish to be part of it, and not all of them share the wish to see Ukraine being part of it. And the same applies to NATO. I think that if you want Russia to strengthen, keep Ukraine out. And this is not, it's not just any kind of a counterbalance to counter Russia's increasing strength. It's just a figure of speech. But we know who has power in this world, and those empires that remain and with quite some clout. If we want to see NATO and the European Union remain important powers, and Ukraine, given its size and given its population, a nation that survived several wars, if you want a partner as strong as we are, please extend us an invitation. And
Mr. President, it's all very well you saying that NATO needs us, the EU needs us, but as far as Brussels is concerned, still more as far as Washington is concerned, they're only interested in a strong alliance and commitment to you if they are convinced that you and your country are serious about real structural reform, enforcing the rule of law, delivering on anti-corruption promises. They saw you start with some real momentum 2 years ago. They now worry that you've run out of momentum, that you are not committed to this fundamental reform program.
I like your mood. It's every time you ask a question, I like the mood that you display when asking a question. So, as regards reforms, there are those three whales on which dialogue actually relies, and then basically any question is wrapped that way by any journalist. It's when are reforms coming? When are you going to eliminate corruption? The judicial reform, please always remember that if you throw in the judicial reform, then you come across as smarter than the next journalist. Remember to mention that, okay, use the word reform several times is what a journalist needs. Because if you don't use the word, then they will not be understood. Then you need to throw in corruption. Because corruption only exists in Ukraine, does it? Look, like everyone, all corrupt individuals have flocked to Ukraine. They've given up on their life wherever they may be coming from. Where they go back, they lead an honest life. But now they then come over to Ukraine with their capital. It's still unclear how they managed to bring the capital over to Ukraine. But it's 100% at customs. It's Ukrainian customs. They all had to pay bribes anytime there. When exporting their ill-gotten capital, nobody caught them, but certainly Ukraine did demand a bribe. When they came here, they did not see any change in Ukraine's army. So there was once this kind of digest, humorous digest called Crocodile back in Soviet day. It is like a parody of Ukraine. If you recall, when the governor of California, so the Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was and is an actor, he starred in Red Heat. He was playing there's this guy, he spoke with this very heavy accent, this big guy, like a caricature, if you will, mocking a certain sort of image, if you will. And, well, I believe that under various media policies, there has emerged a caricature type of attitude towards Ukraine, towards Ukrainians. And if you just look at Silicon Valley, I paid a visit recently. There are lots of Ukrainian professionals working there. Ukraine currently has some 240,000 IT professionals. We are one of the strongest IT hubs in Europe. We are a digital capital in Europe. And where there are numbers, there is no corruption. And if you look at our business companies who have weathered the tide, survived COVID-19, our farming companies that lead the pack and being major exporters to Europe, to Egypt, to China, by European standards. So I'm not one of those presidents, and I actually hate this word public official, civil servant, but this is what I've been, and that's been used to refer to me. But it's whenever there's talk of any corruption, any reform, they go, yes, 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 we will improve, we will change, is the reaction. But nobody appears to be willing to see that we have changed. We are pushing down this path. We have voted in the judicial reform.
Me, it's not just clever journalists who constantly talk about reform and anti-corruption. It's actually your partners in the EU, in the United States government, in the IMF. They are the ones who are worrying that you are slowing down, that you are failing to build on the momentum that you had at the beginning of your administration. They are the ones you need to convince, not me.
So, look, we need to convince ourselves. We are building our own nation for our own people. And partners, well, I think that we are past that stage. It's a new stage in the sense that it's like in a relationship with a woman, with a partner. And there are partners and there are good friends. And, you know, Ukraine is past that stage. We need not as much strategic partners, we need strategic friends. Partners could speak about what it is we are lacking, and friends should consolidate around Ukraine.
Let me ask you about Vladimir Putin. Have you changed your mind about Vladimir Putin in the last 2 years? Because when you came to power, you seemed convinced you could do a deal with him. You said, if I don't bring peace to my country, I'm going to quit. Now it seems you're determined to run for a second term, but you certainly haven't brought peace to your country. So I'm just wondering, what is your assessment of Vladimir Putin right now?
Well, as regards my view of Putin, and if it's changed, well, I wish I had more time to think about him. It's his country. I just don't want to offend him personally or his country for saying so. But I'm more interested in whether or not we can have a really productive discussion, not just for any kind of a declaration, but it's like to have a more substantive conversation. Not that meeting that we had during the Normandy talks, but then there were some results. We brought back 100 Ukrainian nationals. We made 100 Ukrainian families happy, and it was quite an accomplishment, if I may say so. We spoke about demining, we spoke about reopening the checkpoints, but I only wish we were moving at a faster pace. But I think that Russia is reluctant, they don't see much sense in speeding up the resolution of this conflict, and they really don't want that. And this is my own problem, my internal problem, if you will, in terms of what I can do and what I will be doing. How can I possibly make them become willing to speak in a more substantive manner about deoccupation of Ukrainian territory. It's not through any phrases or attempts to intimidate anyone or throwing threats and at those people. We will not get far. I want a result, and I measure result by people. Okay, if we meet again with Putin as part of the Normandy talks, well, it's the ball is in their court. Yes, we are strong and independent as a nation, but in some respects we are not powerful enough to dictate policy. We really want that. We are moving in that direction, but we are having an honest conversation, aren't we? If we were to sit down again in the Normandy format, so we're working to make it happen, a certain number of people will be released. It's not all for all. Yes, we are pursuing this line of negotiation, but Russia's never done it. But if there is a meeting, there will be some result. And if it is 50 people, 100 people, 2 people, well, we'll have to see. So that is a tangible result from our meeting. The same applies to demining, the same applies to reopening the checkpoints. It's been 18 months since December 2019. All those checkpoints we have opened up on our side. We're waiting for the other side to do their bit. Well, it depends on the political will of one single individual.
Let me ask you, over the last year, we've seen a troop build-up on the Russian side of the border, 100,000 or so troops gathering. We've seen Russia's naval activities in the Black Sea ramped up with potentially dangerous consequences for international shipping and for Ukraine. Do you fear that there is a real possibility of all-out war with Russia?
I think it is a possibility. I think it is a possibility, and it is a really a palpable one. I think that 2014, well, unfortunately, but it was a step forward on the part of Russia, and then owing to Ukrainians, there was a step back. So we made them stop. But it's not that it was over threats that Ukraine would become a member of NATO or the European Union. I don't recall back in 2014 that there was any serious threats of that happening. But that was the choice that Ukraine made. It is the geopolitical choice that each Ukrainian made. But that's a different subject. But there is potential in this particular topic. I think that would be the biggest blunder in principle on the part of the Russian Federation, if it were ever to attempt that. If that were to happen, then no good neighborhood would be possible between Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus. If there was to be a major escalation on the part of Russia. Why Belarus? Because now we understand that there's Russian presence in Belarusian territory, and I think that the world has changed, and that is probably the spookiest scenario. It's for me as a human, as a Ukrainian, that I could potentially conceive of. But unfortunately, this probability exists.
To what we were discussing earlier about your visit to Washington, do you think Joe Biden gets it in terms of the dangers and the vulnerabilities there are in the current situation?
I think he does get it.
And what did he say to you about America's level of commitment?
At what moment out of the 2-hour conversation, because we spoke about this at quite some length, and we looked at the situation in the Donbass from various perspectives and the related issue of security when it comes to Crimea. I don't know how many facets that particular pyramid has, but I think in terms of security when it comes to Ukraine and the issue of the Navy and anti-aircraft defenses and those two big concepts where the United States and in particular President Biden has expressed a commitment to supporting Ukrainian proposals, and it was a very important signal to us. We'll see how it goes, how the situation develops in real time, because actions speak louder
Mr.
than
President,
words.
we have about 10 minutes left, and I do want to bring in some other voices into our conversation. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a
Нас
question...
є багато більше.
Yeah, we have many more. We have,
Great.
yeah.
Excellent. So we have a little bit of time. So if you have a question for President Zelensky, I may be able to call upon you. What I want to do first, though, is turn to some of my co-moderators over the next 2 days of our discussions, just to bring them into the conversation. Fareed Zakaria, I know that you will have a question for the President, and I'd love you to give me your thoughts and your question right now.
Mr. President, honored to see you again. I wanted to ask you about Ukraine's relations with Russia. President Putin took the time to write a very long essay about Russia and Ukraine several months ago, which you tweeted about. He called it, I think, on the historical unity of the Russian and Ukrainian people. And what struck me about it was he basically contested Ukraine's right to exist as an independent nation. Is the problem Ukraine has with Russia just a problem of one man, one person, Putin? Or is there a broader problem in Russia among Russian elites who really do not, as that essay seemed to suggest, fundamentally view Ukraine as an independent and sovereign nation, which would suggest your problem is much larger than Putin? You have a kind of generational struggle to convince Russia and Russians that Ukraine should be whole, independent, and free.
Мені здається, що розумних
I believe
росіян,
that
а вони є такі, не треба
the
переконувати.
intelligent Russians, and they do exist, and we don't need to convince them, they know for a fact that there is an independent Ukraine. They respect our independence, and it's not that they've heard about this country's sovereignty. They know this subject. They know the traditions, they know the culture, they know the arts, and their attitude towards independence, Ukrainian independence, is 100% respectful, and they even maybe if the childish question that may sound, whose is Crimea? So it's they appreciate that Ukraine is an independent nation with a rich history, but I believe that it does not depend as much on a nation or on ethnicity, whether people have respect for any country. We're talking about Afghanistan today, any country. It's basically the whole concept, whole notion of respecting a nation. And this translates into respecting its people. And if you respect the independence of a nation, then this will be reciprocated by other people respecting you and your own nation and people. I think that the big problem is that media policies as pursued by the Russian Federation really hinges on disrespecting Ukraine's independence. And the real challenge here is not that this is being served by a certain political technologists basically trying to sell this Russian world, but it's just that the attitude and the broke down and that relationship broke down. If I was talking about partners and friends. Now, who are we? We are foes. Now, it's a different shelf. It's a different level of relationship, if you will. As compared to being friends, it's friend or foe. Can you imagine this big precipice between the two, and how to bridge it, how to bring back that which we lost? And that is not something anyone understands. I think only we'll see in time and how much energy will have to go into rebuilding that relationship, because good will prevail at the end of the day. Things will go back to normal. Our people, our territory, and a certain level of relationship. So I think that what you spoke about, this disrespect for independence, for history, it's a very powerful word. This was a word used by the Russian president. He has been elected by his own people. And he is sending those signals, and people are paying attention. And if he is publishing articles on a daily basis or television, like those actors whom we have loved very dearly since Soviet day, but if in the current media environment they speak publicly of TV screens that Ukraine is a non-state, that it is not genuinely independent, this certainly has a very strong impact on the average citizen, and it is capable of breaking down the average citizen. But the biggest challenge is the danger of reaching a point of no return, and that is, historically speaking, is the most dangerous prospect, because there's Ukraine, there's Russia. We are bound to live together as neighbors.
I do want to bring our other co-moderators in just briefly with a thought each. Neil, if Neil Ferguson's with us, ladies and gentlemen, and Neil, if you've got a quick question for the President.
Mr. President, it's a pleasure to see you again. I want to say the word that has been conspicuous by its absence thus far, China. It was reported last month that Ukraine withdrew its signature from a UN statement with respect to Xinjiang and the genocide against the Uyghurs because of Chinese pressure on trade and on vaccine supply. Please could you update us on your relationship with China? For many of us, we seem to be in the early stages of a second Cold War, and in many ways China matters far more than Russia in that context.
As for our relations with China, you know, it seems to me that today, when everybody thinks about the internal domestic policy and the domestic business and the economy of the state, what can I say about the country with which we have the biggest trade? Let's say the turnover, what we were talking about, the strategic relations, strategic economic partnership and partners. I know that the Chinese business actually enters and makes its presence in Ukraine. I really would like to have more international business coming to Ukraine, that's true. As for the strategic enterprise of Ukraine, which we can talk about the last decade's examples, and some of those from the point of view of the shares they were transferred or given to some of our Chinese partners. Actually, we stopped this decision by the decision of the, let's say, the State Defense and Security Council. The strategic security must be here, and the strategic enterprise must remain Ukrainian. You know, the business is business, strategic. Let's say security, strategic security. This is all I can say about the relations. Of course, I would like to increase to talk about more large scale, let's say, business relations and the turnover with China. Why not? Because this is a big country and we can have a very big market.
But it's an interesting point Neil raises. It may become more difficult to boost your relations with China and maintain your close partnership with the United States. You may have to make some difficult choices. What choices are you going to make? Where's your priority?
You mean who is more priority to us, China or the United States?
And in the end, if the United States is asking you to take measures, it might include cutting some of your economic ties with China. You prepared to do that?
Well, so far I cannot see any open or, let's say, impact of this kind. I haven't heard anything about that. I cannot say that there are no signals sent by the United States regarding our any relations or any country which have some relations with China in Europe even. But I don't say that there is nothing like that. But we are quite independent country who can select ourselves, our business partners. So we make no special selection. If the business is open and pure, and it can provide additional jobs in Ukraine, then this is one of our priority, yes.
Rana in, if I may. Just Rana's also co-moderating over the next couple of days, and I know she's got a question for you.
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks, Mr. President, for your comments. I'm going to follow up a little bit on what Neil was talking about in regards to the bipolar or tripolar world that we're living in, US, China, Europe, perhaps going a different way. A big part of that is tech and trade and the difference in regimes. So far, it seems that technology has been about big surveillance state, i.e. China, or big tech, as in the US. Ukraine is a very digitally savvy country. Is there a way in which decentralized technologies could actually help bolster democracy? I mean, can we see any kind of a tipping point there? Any advice that you can offer?
Я прошу вибачення. Чи
Really, I apologize. Maybe there was some problem with the translation. We might know.
Can you?
Yeah, so what I'm getting at is there a way in which technology, particularly as you've experienced it used here in Ukraine, can it help to bolster liberal democracy in countries at a time when technology seems to be creating disinformation, pressures on democracy, and really there seems to be a square off between maybe China and Google? Complicated question, but anything you can add?
Чесно кажучи, я вважаю, що на
Honestly speaking, I believe that if we are talking about Ukrainian business, nobody impacts that. Well, I really do not understand when you're talking about Google. You know, my real sincere attitude regarding the Google company. You are talking about that?
Вибачте, будь ласка.
Well, I'm really sorry, didn't understand you properly.
Як технології впливають на демократію?
How technology can impact democracy, you know, this is the essence of your question. As far as I understood, I can't understand really how the Chinese technologies can impact the democracy in Ukraine. Speaking about democracy in Ukraine, any country's technology, including China, they cannot have any effect. This is my opinion. I believe that the democracy of this or that country is affected, first of all, by internal things like the society. It can develop in a democratic way or not. If you remark on how it impacts the combating corruption, I would provide you a detailed answer how the American or European, Chinese or Russian technologies can impact the security of our country. If you ask how it impacts the cyber security in Ukraine, how they can impact business, how they can those technologies impact the taxation system. How would I answer? You provide a very simple question. Technologies actually help us develop our state, and digitalization, which is in the beginning of the road here, is a good example of that. Actually, we initiate. I'm talking about the young experts. They initiate where we have some space, virtual, technological analog of the Silicon Valley. But anyone can actually provide the rational approach, and it seems to me they can offer some kind of soft taxation system in order to develop. If we're talking about the technologies which impact or affect democracy, we're talking about the cyber threats. They are there, which are available in any country, and we decided to let's say to provide the cyber troops in Ukraine. But this is another subject of a different discussion. I could provide a very detailed answer or talk to you in a detailed manner. We are going to open the cyber centers in this country, and we're trying to combat the potential threats, including the Russian threats. Well, in addition to some generalized things, because they attach a lot of attention to technologies, IT industry here, and I attach a lot of focus, a lot of attention on that. We are looking for good experts. We are looking for a lot of money, etc., etc. And this is very important question, but how it impacts democracy. You know, it seems to me that everything depends on yourselves, in what country you would like to live in. Nothing can impact the authorities. If we are talking about technologies or different institutions, nothing can impact that. No external enemy can provide an impact as compared to the impact provided by internal or domestic society. If they would like to live in a democratic state, then we are talking about the impact. And this is the most important about the technology, which hasn't been changed over the last century. The people are the way they perceive themselves. For example, they live in Europe and they would like to, and they say we would like to become a European state. We want to live this way. We want to work in this way. Well, there are only a few who would say that we would like to have such a vacation, such a rest, but we would like to be such and such. Those are technologies. The most scary, which can actually change this attitude when a certain person say, I don't want to continue to live in the previous manner, I don't want to live this way, well, maybe I will go back to the Soviet times. This is the information technology we are talking about. Even in Ukraine, there is some kind of the disruption of, let's say, information. Disruption, if you're talking about the impact of the Russian policy or the Chinese policy, U.S. policy, other big countries or empires. So there is no unity in the information field in Ukraine. So on the one hand, we are talking about freedom of speech, which is true, and democracy on the other hand, we are talking about the most powerful, let's say, blow on the self-sufficiency and democracy in Ukraine. That's why Ukraine, once again, I'm sorry, if you're talking about Ukrainian army, it proved that the external enemy cannot actually, let's say, ruin our country, but whether we ourselves can do that from inside, this is a different issue.
Before we end, we've got some of the brightest and best young Ukrainians.
Він не майже закінчився, він закінчився.
No, the time is up, Joel.
Well, no, but I sure you, like me, would like to hear at least just one question from one of the young Ukrainians who's joined us today, because there are some very bright Ukrainian people in our audience, young people who've been invited. And I'd just love to get one question, because it's an opportunity for you to speak direct to your president. So you've got your hand up, sir. You get the prize. You get to ask the final question to President Zelenskyy.
Добре. Пане президенте, мене звуть Артем Шаїпов.
Great. Artem Shaipov is my name, Mr. President. Artem Shaipov. 2 years ago, I headed an organization called Ukrainians Alumni of Leading World Universities Professional Government. There are 3,000 alumni of, some of the best Western universities. I myself am an alumnus of Cambridge University, thanks to Mr. Pinchuk's support. So we wanted to send you a letter back then saying that we could help you recruit some of the best minds.
Раптом.
Sent you a letter today. So you don't mind if we send you a letter, or we can talk it now? You say about the fact that you don't have enough new hires, whilst there's a lot of people who are willing to work for New Ukraine and our organization, one of those sources of higher, so you want to send me a letter? Okay.
Дайте мені листа.
Give me your letter. Send me your letter. I will. I'll send this letter to an address. You may kindly, well, Bankova, you mean,
Багато листів.
well, many letters come to my address. I have a question to ask you in the meantime. I am all for having guys like you working with us, sometimes even instead of us, frankly speaking, because we've already had some hard time working. So let me ask you this.
Працювати на державу, в моєму розумінні,
Working for the
складно.
nation, for the government of the nation, well, it is difficult and the reward isn't that high. The returns aren't that big, and sometimes your good name may be besmirched, and
Колись.
well, one day you may expect reward coming your way. One day someone will tell you that that he was a good guy. That's a challenge. So are you ready? Are you and people like you ready to take the chance because you want to change something, because you want to make something at least as good as it is elsewhere? How much do you make a month today? Well, I am under non-disclosure agreement. I can't disclose my remuneration. No. With us, it's all open. So I'm asking if you are ready, without even sending your letter to my address. So, question is, are you willing to work for the government in a pretty senior position, not the presidential position? I don't tend as much. 30,000 hryvnias a month. Yes, I am. I am if.
Там немає якщо в контракті.
But we know ifs. There are no ifs in the contract. If I know that what I do will contribute to the good of my nation, to the good of my people. Okay, I'm hiring you and 10 other guys like you ready to make 30,000.
What exactly is going
Пане
on?
президенте,
Що?
як ми могли би продовжити через кого цю розмову? Так,
Well,
щоб
Mr.
ти не вважав, що ти
President, how can we continue this discussion? Head of my office is attending. No, he's not chief accountant, but he's in contact with me. So
Приходьте до нас.
I send you an invitation. Come to me, accompanied by those best candidates, not to see how we're going about renovation at Bankova Street. Well, of course you can come and talk to us and bring those who are ready to join and work. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I tell you what, I think it's clear that young people in Ukraine have high expectations of you, and you have high expectations of the next generation of leaders in Ukraine, which is the way it should be. We've got to close. I just want to ask you this very personal question. You made your name and had a lot of fun playing the role of a president on a TV show. And right now, you are the president. You're the real president. You wake up every morning and you know that your approval ratings have slid well below 50%, that 2/3 of Ukrainians in some polls say that they disapprove of the job you're doing. Do you ever, when you wake up in the morning, think, shit, I wish I was still playing the president on TV rather than in real life? Is there an answer?
Without answer.
I want an answer.
Yeah, are you sure?
Yeah.
Окей. Ну, по-перше, я став відомим до того.
Well, firstly, I was well known before I played the president, because if I weren't known, I would not be playing president. That's important. Secondly, I'm still waking up every morning all by myself, and it means that I really want to continue living and changing lives around myself and in the country, because I'm the citizen of Ukraine. When the presidency is over, I really want to still be living in Ukraine.
Is that it?
А другу частину, я думаю, ви
And the
знаєте.
second part, well, I
відповідь на
think
другу
you know
частину
the
вашого питання.
answer to your
Чесно, я не
question.
жалію.
I
Не
really
жалію, тому що це,
I really
напевно, можливість. Іноді
am not
бувають
sorry.
моменти, коли я думаю,
Sometimes there are
навіщо все це, якщо ти
moments in my life when I
іноді
am
втрачаєш,
asking myself, why
втрачаєш
would I?
людяність, іноді
Because,
втрачаєш відчуття
sometimes you
дійсно, іноді
lose
втрачаєш
this,
відчуття
this
деякої реальності,
feeling
для
of
чого ти повинен
reality.
на вулицю спілкуватися з людьми і розуміти, що відбувається.
And
Ти
you
повинен
you
жити
need to
в
go,
акваріумі.
outside and talk to people, understand what's going on. You should not be living in an aquarium, but you in a water tank. But since people trusted you and believed in you, you can't go the other way. You want to respect people, and you want people to respect you, and that's important. Because they say that presidents remain president, and I really want to remain the president, because I want people to remember me as a president and say, well, we respect you, it wasn't that bad as you were the president.
До речі, про рейтинги.
And talking about the rankings, look at that. They have grown, haven't they?
Okay, well, we really have run out of time now, but you've given us a great deal of your time. We really appreciate it. President Zelenskyy, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much indeed.